During tax season, you sit at the kitchen table, that white form in your hands, and a voice inside whispers, "This isn't fair." You worked late every night. You gave up your weekends. You swallowed the stress. And now you realize that for 3 or 4 of those 12 months, every penny you earned, roughly 25% of everything you made this year, went straight into the government's pocket. On one hand, you want to rebel against what's making you feel this way. But on the other, you submit. Because your whole life you were told one thing: taxes are the price of civilization. You pay. You don't complain. Point 24. Then you open your phone. And you see a headline about a billionaire paying a lower tax rate than you do. In that moment, you realize something has gone very wrong. Tech titans and real estate moguls living lavish lifestyles, while reporting almost zero income to the tax authorities. You think the system is broken. And here is the uncomfortable truth I'm going to share with you. The system really is tilted. But here's what will surprise you. These people aren't breaking the rules. On the contrary, they know the rules far better than you do. They're playing a completely different game, with a completely different rulebook. One that was never taught to you in school. Most people believe the path to wealth looks like this. Work hard, earn a high salary, save what's left after taxes. But the wealthy know this very well. Money earned through labor is the most heavily taxed money on the planet. Trying to get rich through a salary is like running miles with a backpack full of bricks. Today I'm going to walk you through the exact mechanism the top 1% use to opt out of the tax system entirely. It's called buy, borrow, and die. By the end of this video, you'll understand why your high salary might actually be a trap, and how you can apply these strategies even if you're not a billionaire yet. We're going to break this 3-phase strategy apart and transform you from a tax victim into a tax strategist. If you're ready, let's begin. To understand why the wealthy don't pay taxes, you first need to grasp one fundamental thing: how you earn money versus how they earn money. When you receive a salary, that money is taxed before it ever reaches your bank account. The federal government takes its cut. The state and Social Security take theirs. What's left is what you use to pay your bills and try to build a life. This is what financial experts call the W-2 trap. You are selling your time for money, and that money is being taxed at the highest possible rates. Wealthy people don't sell their time for money. They convert their money into assets. And this brings us to the first phase of the strategy: buy. The wealthy don't focus on income. They focus on net worth. They take their capital and invest it in appreciating assets: stocks, real estate, or businesses. And here is the critical detail most people miss. When you buy a stock or a property and its value rises, you don't owe a single penny in taxes on that growth until you actually sell it. This is called an unrealized gain. You buy a share of Amazon for $100 and it climbs to $1,000. On paper, you've made $900. The tax authority can't touch that $900. It sits there, growing, compounding year after year, completely tax-free. That's why you see headlines about a billionaire whose net worth jumped $10 billion in a single year yet paid zero income tax. Because that wealth is locked inside assets, not sitting in a checking account as cash. The wealthy understand. The moment you sell an asset, you trigger a taxable event. So they simply never sell. The snowball keeps rolling, growing bigger and bigger. But this raises a very obvious question. If all their money is tied up in stocks and buildings and they never sell anything, how do they cover their living expenses? How do they finance the yachts and the mansions and even the grocery run? If their wealth is just numbers on a screen, how does it actually work in practice? This is exactly where we enter the second and most brilliant phase of the strategy: borrow. This part is going to rewire how you think, because we were all taught that debt is bad. That debt is slavery. But for the wealthy, debt is not a burden. It is a tool. It is a tax-free way to access their wealth. Instead of selling their stocks, which would generate a massive tax bill, they go to the bank and request a loan using their assets as collateral. This is often called a securities-backed line of credit. The bank looks at their $10 million portfolio and says, "Of course, we'll lend you $5 million at a very low interest rate, because we know your assets are backing it." And here is where the magic happens. Loan proceeds are not taxable income. When the bank wires that $5 million into their account, the tax authority sees zero income. $5 million of completely tax-free spending power. They can live a lifestyle you can only dream of. and on paper they appear to have no income at all. But you might be thinking, what about the interest? Don't they have to pay interest on that loan? Yes, they do. But the math is overwhelmingly in their favor. Let's say they're paying 3 or 4% interest on the loan, but their investment portfolio continues growing at 8 or 10% a year. They're making a profit on the borrowed money. They're living on the bank's money, while their own money keeps compounding without interruption. This is called positive arbitrage. They're essentially being paid to borrow money to fund their lifestyle. Now compare that to your situation. You sell your labor, pay 30 to 40% in taxes, and try to invest what remains. They're skipping the tax step entirely and keeping their wealth working for them 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. This brings us to the third and final phase of the strategy, die. I know that sounds a bit grim, but estate planning is where the ultimate tax loophole lives. A question might be forming in your mind. If they keep borrowing and borrowing, doesn't the bill eventually come due? Yes and no. When a wealthy individual passes away, their heirs inherit the assets. And under current tax law, something remarkable happens. It's called the step-up in basis, and it is the holy grail of tax avoidance. Let me explain with a simple example. Say your grandmother bought a share of stock 50 years ago for $10. Today, that share is worth $500. If she had sold it the day before she died, she would have owed capital gains tax on that $490 profit. But when she passes and leaves it to you, the cost basis of that stock resets to the current market value. The IRS treats it as though you purchased it for $500. 50 years of accumulated capital gains tax liability simply evaporates. Gone. You can sell that stock the next day for $500 and pay zero capital gains tax. And here is how the cycle closes. The heirs inherit the assets tax-free, thanks to the step-up in basis. They sell a small portion to pay off the loans taken out to fund the lifestyle. Because the basis was reset, they pay no tax on that sale. The debt is wiped clean, the family keeps the vast majority of the wealth, and the cycle begins again. Buy assets. Borrow against them to live. Die to erase the tax bill. It is a perpetual wealth creation machine that completely bypasses the tax system that you and I are required to participate in. This is why wealth inequality is exploding. This is why the middle class feels like it's running on a treadmill, while the wealthy seem to be riding an elevator to the top. The tax code was written by the wealthy for the wealthy. It rewards capital and penalizes labor. If you work for money, you lose. If your money works for you, you win. It really is that simple. And getting angry about it won't change your bank account. What will change your bank account is understanding these rules and figuring out how to apply them to your own life, even if you're not a billionaire. Now you might be thinking, this sounds great for Jeff Bezos, but I can't walk into the bank and ask for $1 million loan against my savings account. You're right. You can't do it at that scale yet. But the principles of buy, borrow, die can be applied by anyone who shifts their mindset from consumer to investor. The first step is this. Stop making low-interest debt repayment your number one priority, and start making the accumulation of appreciating assets your number one priority. Most people are obsessed with being debt-free. They throw every extra dollar at their mortgage or their low-interest car loan. They believe this is the path to freedom. But in doing so, they're trapping their equity inside an asset they can neither eat nor spend. Their liquidity dries up. A wealthy person would never pay off a 3% mortgage early. They'd take that extra cash and buy more assets, an index fund and income-generating property. They want their money growing at 8 or 10%, not saving them 3. They understand opportunity cost. Every dollar you use to pay down cheap debt is a dollar that isn't out there working for you. Let's look at homeownership through this lens. For the average person, their home is their biggest asset, but most people treat it like a piggy bank they're trying to fill up. The smart strategy is to treat it like a bank you can borrow from. As your home increases in value, you can open a home equity line of credit, accessing that cash tax-free without selling the house. You can use those borrowed funds to buy another rental property or to launch a business venture. You're borrowing against one asset to buy more assets. You're creating your own mini version of buy, borrow, die. You're using debt to expand your wealth, not using income to pay off debt. This requires a major psychological shift. You have to stop fearing debt and start respecting it as a tool. There is good debt and there is bad debt. Bad debt is borrowing money to buy things that lose value: cars, clothes, vacations. That is consumer debt, and it will keep you poor forever. Good debt is borrowing money to buy assets that appreciate or generate income. Good debt makes you wealthy. The wealthy carry almost no consumer debt, but they carry enormous investment debt. They use leverage. They control large amounts of assets with relatively little of their own cash. Another way to apply this is through your investment portfolio. If you have a taxable brokerage account, you can apply for margin privileges, allowing you to borrow against the value of your stocks. Now, there are risks. You need to be careful about forced selling if the market drops. But used conservatively, it's a way to access liquidity without triggering taxes. Instead of selling stocks to cover a down payment or an emergency, you borrow against your portfolio. You keep your stocks, you keep your growth, and you avoid the capital gains tax. The trap most people fall into is the liquidity trap. They keep their money in cash because they want to be able to reach it. But cash is a terrible asset. It loses value to inflation every single year. The wealthy hold almost no cash. They hold assets. And because they know how to borrow against those assets, they enjoy plenty of liquidity without holding cash. They've understood that in a modern financial system, access to credit is just as good as having cash in the bank, but it allows your net worth to grow far faster. This brings us to the concept of phantom income versus phantom debt. When you work a job, you have real income and real taxes. But when you own assets, you have phantom income, appreciation you don't pay taxes on. The wealthy maximize phantom income. Meanwhile, most middle-class people have phantom debt, liabilities like car leases and subscriptions that drain their wealth, but don't appear on a balance sheet as traditional debt. You need to flip this equation. You want to accumulate assets that generate invisible, tax-free growth, and eliminate the lifestyle liabilities that bleed your cash flow. We also need to talk about inflation's role in this strategy. Buy borrow die is, at its core, a massive bet against the currency. When you borrow money, you're shorting the dollar. You borrow dollars today worth a certain amount, and you pay them back years later with dollars worth less thanks to inflation. If inflation runs at 3% a year and your loan rate is 3%, the real cost of that loan is zero. You're essentially borrowing for free. The wealthy use inflation to erode the value of their debts, while their assets rise in price alongside it. They're winning on both sides of the equation. The middle-class saver is losing on both sides. Their cash savings are being eaten by inflation, and they're not carrying the kind of good debt that gets cheaper over time. They're swimming upstream. The wealthy are floating downstream. You have to stop trying to save your way to wealth. You cannot save your way to wealth in a monetary system designed to inflate. You have to invest your way to wealth, and you have to use leverage to amplify those returns. Now, I know this sounds risky, and it is risky if you don't know what you're doing. Leverage cuts both ways. If you borrow to buy assets and those assets lose value, you can be wiped out. This is why the wealthy also place enormous emphasis on risk management. They diversify. They maintain cash reserves. They don't over-leverage. They use debt strategically, not recklessly. You need to build a solid foundation before you start layering on leverage. You need that emergency fund. You need that steady income stream. But once you have the foundation, you have to stop playing it safe and start playing it smart. One of the most practical steps you can take right now is to look at your retirement accounts. While tax-advantaged retirement accounts are great, they have limitations. You can't easily borrow against them. The wealthy deliberately build large taxable brokerage accounts specifically for the flexibility they offer. A taxable account lets you apply the buy, borrow, die strategy far more effectively than a retirement account where the government sets all the rules. If you're maxing out your retirement contributions but have zero liquidity in a brokerage account, you may be locking yourself into a rigid system that limits your options. Think about the concept of tax drag. Every time you pay tax, you lose a piece of your compounding engine. If you lose 30% of your gains to taxes every year over 40 years, that doesn't just reduce your wealth by 30%. Because of the compounding lost on that tax money, your final net worth could be reduced by 50 or 60%. Buy, borrow, die is ultimately about eliminating tax drag, keeping 100% of your capital working for you 100% of the time. It is the most efficient wealth-building method that exists. You have to change your identity. You have to stop seeing yourself as a worker and start seeing yourself as a capital allocator. A worker tries to increase their salary. A capital allocator tries to increase their assets. A worker tries to pay off debt. A capital allocator manages debt. A worker is afraid of the tax authority. A capital allocator uses the tax code as a roadmap. The system is not going to change. The government is not going to fix this for you. If you wait for the laws to become fair, you will be waiting forever. You have to learn the rules of the game as it is played right now, and play it to win. The beauty of this is that it doesn't require you to be a genius. It requires discipline and patience. It takes time to build the asset base this strategy needs. If you have $500 in your portfolio today, you can't borrow against it tomorrow. But if you spend the next 10 years aggressively buying assets instead of liabilities, you will eventually reach a crossover point. You will reach a point where your assets can support your lifestyle. And when you reach that point, you never have to sell. You never have to pay the tax man again. You will have achieved true financial freedom. Don't let fear of debt keep you poor. Don't let the obsession with income blind you to the power of assets. Start small. Buy your first index fund. Buy your first rental property. Keep buying. Never sell. And when you need cash, learn how to access it without triggering a tax bill. This is the blueprint. This is how dynastic families have preserved their wealth across generations. It isn't a secret. It's just math. And now that you understand the math, you have no excuse to keep playing the old game. Your future self is counting on you to stop working for money and start making money work for you. The tax code is a set of incentives. Do what the system rewards, invest and build, and you will be rewarded. Do only what it penalizes, trade only your time, and you will be taxed for it. Align your financial behavior with the system's incentives. Stop swimming upstream. Build your arc of assets, and let the current of compound interest carry you to the wealth you deserve.